noise, but I don't know if I really do. So I'm Barbara Moore, and I'm with the Rhode Island Department of Health. I've actually only been with the Department of Health for 6 months. Before that was for a long time at the Department of Environmental Management. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the potential health impacts of the port on the neighboring areas. So environmental health is something that is pretty critical to the health department's mission in protecting public health in this state. The department has 3 leading priorities, and I think 2 of them are very consistent with this kind of a situation. One is addressing the social and environmental determinants of health in Rhode Island, so figuring out what the social factors and environmental factors are that determine the health of people in the state. And the second one, eliminating the disparities of health in Rhode Island and promoting health equity. And obviously we have some areas where people are much more impacted by environmental issues or other issues than you can have that's going to lead to disparities in health outcomes. I think that probably you all know that this is an area that has fairly high levels of asthma. The pediatric asthma rates in Rhode Island's core cities, which are Providence, Pawtucket, and Central Falls, tend to be the highest in the state. And the rates in certain areas, including lower South Providence, are particularly high. And you know, as you would expect, high asthma rates often occur in the same places, and are, you know, there's links to higher levels of poverty and other factors, including environmental factors and housing factors and so forth. So this is just a map from Julian's fact book that shows this. So that's just the darker areas are the areas of the state with our highest pediatric asthma rates. And then if you do the next one slide, these are just the core cities. So the dark area down here is the area of lower South Providence, one of the darkest areas. So it's an area with a pediatric asthma rate during this period of time is excess of 10% of children during that period had asthma. Is that right? Okay. All right. And it also corresponds to areas with high poverty rates. Again, the darker areas are the areas that have the lowest median income. And again, you see the core areas of Providence, Central Falls, and Pawtucket lighting up in this slide as well. So in the port, there are a number of air pollution sources of various kinds. The stationary sources, which are industrial or commercial sources. There are oil, gasoline, natural gas facilities. There's a number of jewelry and metalworking facilities. There's a couple of facilities that make coatings and chemical formulations. And there's also metal recycling facilities and sort of a handful of other things. But those are kind of the predominant ones. There are also a number of mobile sources that move. So within the port area itself, there's a lot of truck traffic, and then there's trucks and other vehicles that are going to and from the port. There's locomotives bringing in goods and things up. Marine vessels along the dock of the port. There's construction equipment, industrial equipment, and non-road equipment. And then you sort of add that to the traffic that's not immediately associated with the port, but is in this area. So the cars cars, trucks, buses, and other vehicles on the highway, and then also on the city streets. So just want to talk a minute about the difference between routine releases and accidental or emergency releases. Routine releases are the releases that sort of happen as part of the normal operation of a facility. And they tend to not be huge, but they're things that happen. They happen sort of routinely. So they may happen every day, they may happen, periodically, but they're sort of known and understood. And often because you sort of know what to expect with them, you can regulate them with permits, they can be controlled by air pollution control equipment. And then in addition, there's the issue of accidental releases, which I think someone else is going to talk about more, but that's the result of a malfunction or of equipment or some other event that causes things to not work right. They occur very infrequently, but when they occur, they're a big problem. So it's really, you can have a huge amount of release of a chemical or an explosion or fire in a very short time. So planning for those kinds of events is very important, both planning to prevent them and planning of what you would do if they were to happen. And because the climate is changing, that kind of planning is even more important. A couple of factors that affect that is the fact that that storms are becoming more intense, and so equipment can be more vulnerable. And in the long term, we expect to see quite a bit of sea level rise, and that's a particular problem for facilities that are right around water bodies like a port. So how much routine air emissions from facilities would affect a neighborhood depends on a lot of factors. One is what kind of chemicals they are, how toxic they are. One is how much is released and how they're released. Are they released sort of all at once, and so they could cause, some immediate impacts, or are they released sort of slowly over a period of time, and you can look at more symptomatic effects. How they're emitted. Are they emitted right at ground level? Are they emitted, from a high stack? But I think one of the most important thing is how close the emission is to where people are. And in that we kind of have something going for us in that, there are certainly parts of Washington Park that are above the south end of the port, but the farther that the emissions have to travel from a source before they impact people, the more dilute they get and the less intensive they are. And of course you have to also consider the community itself and whether or not the community is vulnerable because they have other stressors as well. So EPA has done a sort of massive modeling study it's called NADA, National Air Toxics Assessment, where they model emissions from all types of sources, and that includes the stationary sources like industrial commercial sources and residential sources, even like wood burning, and also mobile sources, on-road, non-road, and also biogenics, those kind of natural things. They do also look at formation of pollutants in the atmosphere. And they've kind of made these calculations of what kind of risk you could expect from those kinds of emissions in every census tract in the United States. So it's a really massive project. In the latest study, which they just released in the end of last year, it's based on 2011 emissions data, the cancer risk that they calculated is mostly, in almost every place, is mostly due to mobile sources. So cars, trucks, other mobile equipment, some off-road equipment. Obviously, if you're right next to a source, a stationary source, an industrial source, or a commercial source even, that may very well be your biggest source of exposure. But for most people, and for this census tract, is no different in that way. But by far the biggest risk, both cancer-related and respiratory effects-related, are from mobile sources. Also, the projected risks in this area, in the census tracts that take in Lower South Providence and then the one that's in Washington Park, sort of typical of what you expect for an urban area, and not in any way the areas with the highest risk, predicted risk even in Providence. The areas like that are sort of north, more towards downtown, are actually have much higher risk because they have much higher traffic on the highway. This is just modeling, though. It's not necessarily a monitoring data. In general, what we see, because we do monitoring in this area, is that the levels of many pollutants have decreased over the past 20 years or so. But for many pollutants, they tend to be highest in a city that's in a part of the city that's near a highway, and lowest in rural areas. And in between you have the areas that are urban but not near highways, and then suburban. So it kind of, you can see a real difference in concentrations depending on where you're located. There are some pollutants that don't follow that pattern. For instance, formaldehyde, which actually constitutes a big part of the risk, is actually formed in the atmosphere and not necessarily right near the source that emits the pollutants that it's formed from, and so it's not necessarily highest in any particular part of the city, or even it's not necessarily even higher in a city than in a more rural environment. So this chart, I can see a shadow, but just shows that the top line, which I think is blue, but I'm colorblind, I'm not sure, these are levels of benzene over a period of time from 1995 to 2015, and so it's an average concentrations over that time. Benzene's emitted from, it's a component of gasoline, and it's emitted from vehicles that use gasoline, and also it's a combustion product. The top line is what the concentrations were at a site that we have that's in Pawtucket, right next to the highway. So it's sort of urban near a highway. The next one is it's a site that's on the Urban League, so it's an urban area. The next one down is East Providence, a more suburban area, and then the one at the bottom, the lowest levels, were from Alton Jones and Greenwich, obviously a very urban area. So you can see a general decline, but you still maintain that difference that the people who are living in the city or more urban areas are exposed to higher levels than people who are living in more rural areas. And if you live near a highway, you get sort of a double win. You get even the highest exposure. This is diesel particulate matter. And we now operate a site that's right next to the highway near downtown Providence. And this is for the year 2015. It's just kind of the average levels of diesel particulate we saw. Blue is during the weekdays, and the orangey color is during the weekends. And this is the narrowed site with higher levels. At urban in East Providence, there wasn't much difference. They're pretty similar. But you get right next to the highway, your levels are a lot higher. You tend to fall off pretty quickly as you move away from the highway. DEM last year was awarded more than $500,000 from EPA to do a study to measure air pollutants near I-95. And, as I said, there is the site now that does that, but it's not right where there are people living. So this study is really designed to look at what people are exposed to where they live, or where they recreate, or where kids go to school. We we had wanted to start monitoring at the beginning of this year, but that there were some glitches with that, primarily because I moved from DM to Department of Health, so things had to be sort of changed a little bit. But we have our sites now, and we have our funding, and we're ready to go. So within a couple of months, we'll be starting to monitor at 5 locations. And 2 of them actually are right in this area of the port. So that will make it interesting, because not only will we be able to see the impacts from the highway, but we'll also be able to see impacts from things that are happening in the port. So the first 2 are the ones that are the ones in this kind of area around the port. One's the Ejlri Health Center, which is off Allen's Ave. And then the second one, A Street Province, which is right on the other side of the highway. We actually wanted to go to the Meeting Street School, but couldn't get as close to that as we wanted to, so it's a little bit north of that. And then the other site's this one that's it's down farther south in Elmwood, and then the other 2 are our current sites in the narrowed site in downtown and the one in Kentucky. So that's just, I don't know that you can see it, but the 2 sites in the middle of the 2 that are in this area of the port. The one that says 1 Warren Way is the Ejlri Health Center, and then one says 2 Bay Street is the one that is on the other side of the highway, and then down here at the bottom is the Elmwood site. And then shows up at the top is the site that we have that's near downtown, and then there's another one. So we're going to measure diesel particulate matter as black carbon, ultrafine particulate particles, and sort of a whole range of volatile organic compounds. We're also going to have wind speed and wind direction, so we'll be able to tell, if levels are high, what direction the wind was coming from at that time, and so we'll be able to tell from that, like, what the source is. Is it coming from, port? Is it coming from the highway? What was going on at that time? So we'll have a lot of data. We also are purchasing handheld monitors, which will be used to kind of determine how things change with distance. So, as you move away from the highway, if you, have a tree, does that help? If you have, there are other kinds of barriers, what differences it make. So there's kind of it'll have a variety of uses. We can also look at some other locations if you have an area that you want to look at in more detail. These handheld monitors will be available for looking at other issues as well. So just in summary, you know that the asthma levels in this area are elevated, that there are a variety of sources. Around the port, the routine releases are not all that high, probably do not have impacts that could be measurable in the neighborhood. But there is a potential for accidental releases, and so it's important to plan for and prevent those kinds of releases. That's what I think. And also that mobile sources pose the greatest risk in this area, and in most areas for both cancer and respiratory risk, and that levels of many pollutants tend to be highest in cities and highways, and then that this study that EPA has funded, and we're very grateful for, will give us a lot more information about what the actual levels are in this area. I think the last slide is just my name and contact information.